At 94, Claire Bloom finally broke her silence about something she'd hidden for decades. In her latest interviews, she revealed why she spent years avoiding certain people from her Hollywood past. It wasn't about Richard Johnson specifically. It was about what happened during those intense filming sessions in the 1960s. Something occurred behind the scenes that made her uncomfortable for years. She'd kept quiet to protect careers and reputations. But now, at 94, she says the truth needs to come out. Her confession explains why she turned down so many projects and avoided certain actors completely. Claire Bloom entered the world on 15th of February 1931 in Finchley, a quiet North London suburb that carried more worries than comfort. Her parents, Elizabeth and Edward, were trying to hold a middle-class life together, but the truth was far more fragile. He sold whatever he could, often without success. She managed the home with whatever money arrived. Both sides of the family had escaped the old Russian Empire, changing their names from Blumenthal and Gravitsky to something safer, hoping Britain would offer stability. Yet even in Finchley, the fear of losing everything stayed close. By the time Claire finished primary school, they had already moved several times. Each move reminded her how uncertain life could be for a Jewish family during the 1930s. She grew up hearing conversations about money and risk almost every evening, as if these topics were part of the furniture. Those early years settled deeply into her, shaping the way she saw the world long before she stepped onto a stage. Then the war came. In 1940, the German bombing of London tore apart any sense of routine. Bombs dropped close to their home. Windows shook. Sometimes the whole building seemed to breathe with fear. Her father stayed behind, but Claire, her mother, and her little brother, John, left Britain for safety. Between the ages of 9 and 12, she lived in the United States, mostly in Florida, with relatives. Her mother found work in a dress shop, though she was terrible at selling clothes, which only showed how uncertain their life in exile was. Yet something unexpected happened. Claire found herself singing at charity events to help the British War Relief Society. Soon she was performing on American radio. One year she had been hiding from air raids. The next she was hearing applause through a studio microphone. That contrast stayed with her. It taught her that performance carried danger and comfort at the same time. It also taught her that attention, once felt, could pull you forward, even when you felt far from home. Still, the war followed her. She returned to Britain and faced more disruption. Sirens, sleepless nights, quick moves to new lodgings after each near hit. She later wrote that she never felt she belonged anywhere completely. Too English for America, too touched by America to blend easily into Britain. That strange in-between feeling made her notice accents, manners, and the invisible rules other people seemed to follow with ease. Biographers say this sensitivity moved straight into her acting. It was why she could play fragile or haunted characters with such natural truth. For a girl not yet 15, home had already become something temporary. That became one of the deep engines of her work. Her schooling was just as scattered. She moved through several schools, including Badminton in Bristol and Fernhill Manor in New Milton. Each move came with new teachers, new routines, and a new sense of being the outsider again. But every time she read aloud in class or took part in a small school play, something shifted. Teachers noticed how serious she became. She absorbed every moment. Films like Snow White and Romeo and Juliet left her stunned, and they fed a wish to be Juliet one day. At about 14, she gathered enough courage to actually audition for Juliet at the Shakespeare Memorial Theatre. It was a wild step for a girl with no money, no connections, and a past full of shifting homes. Yet she believed she had one clear path out of insecurity. and she chose to follow it. Around 1944 or 1945, Claire won a scholarship to the Guildhall School of Music and Drama. She was only about 14. While many families were still patching up bomb-damaged walls, she was taking the train into central London to study voice and movement with professionals. Guildhall records place her there during 1944 and 1945, and soon after, she also studied at the Central School of Speech and Drama. Teachers focused on diction and projection, skills that later helped her shape powerful Shakespearean roles. She later joked that the schools gave her technique more than inspiration, but that technique became her armor. By the time she left Guildhall, she was already stepping into professional work sooner than anyone expected. Her evacuated years in the United States shaped her just as strongly. She crossed the Atlantic twice during wartime, performed on American radio as a child, and treated performance as real work by the time she was 12 or 13. Those experiences stayed close, adding a kind of early maturity that set her apart from other teenagers. Back in England, her schooling still felt uneven. Family finances pushed her from Bristol to Cornwall and into smaller local schools. But even in the middle of these changes, her focus kept tightening. She wanted the stage more than anything. From 1946 to 1948, she trained intensely under respected teachers at Guildhall and the Central School, sometimes studying both at once. It was heavy training for someone still in her mid-teens. That pressure prepared her for what came next. In 1946, when she was about 15, she made her British radio debut in a dramatization of Confessions of an Opium Eater. Almost immediately, she stepped into the Oxford Repertory Theatre. She moved quickly from role to role, sometimes learning lines for one part while rehearsing another. She played Helen in An Italian Straw Hat, Jessie in Pink String and Sealing Wax, and a soldier named Jessie Killigrew in It Depends What You Mean. Repertory theater was known for its speed. New productions came one after another. For a 15-year-old, it was a trial by fire, but she handled it. That season marked the moment she stopped being a promising student and became a working actor. A year later, she reached the West End. In 1947, she appeared in The White Devil at the Duchess Theatre, surrounded by major performers like Margaret Rawlings and Hugh Griffith. She had only a small part, but the fact that she was on a professional West End stage at 16 showed how fast her rise had become. At the same time, she continued formal training, slipping between school lessons and live performances, as if both were equally natural. Then came Stratford. By 1948, she joined the Shakespeare Memorial Theatre, stepping into roles that demanded real presence. Some accounts say she played Ophelia at 16, opposite Paul Schofield, while others list her as Lady Blanche in King John. Either way, she was performing serious Shakespeare before she turned 20. Those roles brought her to the attention of filmmakers, and that path soon led to something much larger. In 1951, she was only 20 when Hollywood came calling. Chaplin's friend saw her on stage in Ring Round the Moon, told Chaplin, and suddenly she found herself flying to New York for a filmed test. Then months passed in silence. Chaplin, more than 40 years older than her, finally chose her for limelight. She had only one earlier screen credit, so this became her true breakthrough. The age gap between them was impossible to ignore. He was in his early 60s, born in 1889. She was barely 20. Still, the film opened doors for her, and in 1953, she won the BAFTA for Most Promising Newcomer. But success came with complications. In her memoirs, she wrote that Chaplin directed her every movement, acting out her role and asking her to copy him. She felt guided and controlled at the same time. She and her mother often ate with him after long shooting days, a routine that pulled her closer into his world when she was still very young. Chaplin himself was under pressure, leaving the United States in 1952 because of political attacks. So the atmosphere around Limelight felt tense and closed. Claire absorbed all of it. The BAFTA brought attention, but instead of chasing more films, she returned to classical theater. She stepped into parts like Juliet, Ophelia, and Cordelia with the Old Vic between 1952 and 1954. It was a risky choice. Hollywood wanted her. Theater paid less. Yet she followed her instinct toward roles that fed her craft, rather than her fame. Along the way, strange rumors appeared. Some people insisted she played Helen of Troy in the 1956 epic. She never did. The film starred Rosanna Podesta, not Claire Bloom. She was instead in Richard III, Alexander the Great, and other historical dramas. Perhaps people confused her with Helen because she often played aristocratic or classical women. She later said she always felt slightly outside the center of British society, which added to her discomfort when studios cast her mainly for her beauty. As she moved between Britain and America, she appeared on early television interviews and arts programs. She spoke about the strange mix of glamour and emptiness she felt at Hollywood parties. London theater felt smaller, harsher, but more honest. In America, she often felt observed rather than welcomed. This helped shape her decision to base her life in London even after Hollywood opened its doors. Claire Bloom stepped onto the Old Vic stage in the mid-1950s when she was barely in her 20s, and the moment she played Lady Anne in Richard III beside Laurence Olivier, her life changed shape. She had been Ophelia and Cordelia before, but Lady Anne pulled her deeper. Olivier was not only her co-star, but the director who watched every breath she took on stage. One rehearsal in 1954 even exploded into a shouting match when he told her she looked too fragile for tragedy. The words cut her so sharply that she almost walked out of the whole run, only stopping when friends begged her to stay. And when audiences later watched her in London and in the 1955 film, they felt something real in her anger and hurt. Something that came from the fight she never forgot. By 1956, she was trusted with Juliet and Cordelia in the same Old Vic season. Two roles that demanded purity and pain at the same time. Sometimes she switched from one girl to the other within days, and the season stretched from 12th of June to 7th of July 1956 for Romeo and Juliet, then folded into King Lear and the rest of the repertory. Together they reached roughly 200 performances and sold around 100,000 tickets, an enormous number for a company still trying to rebuild itself after the war. Night after night, she stood under hot lights in tight corsets, so drained some evenings that she kept smelling salts hidden backstage to stop herself from fainting where the public could see. She later said that the physical fight was as hard as the poetry. A year later, the Old Vic took Hamlet to Australia, and Bloom went as Ophelia with Richard Burton as Hamlet. Burton was rising fast, and his restless charm made the whole tour feel louder than a classical show. They already had a history that went back to 1949. Stories say the affair began not long after his marriage to Sybil Williams and slipped in and out of their lives for years. When they reached Australia in 1957, local tabloids noticed how charged their scenes were and printed rumors within days, treating Bloom, then in her mid-20s, like a dangerous spark near a married star. In her 1996 memoir, she described the relationship as passionate but brief in each turn, something that lit the stage and quietly bruised her real life. In 1958, she returned to Broadway in Rashomon and met Rod Steiger during rehearsals. They were told to push their scenes to the edge, to play intimacy and conflict so sharply that the stylized story would feel real for New York audiences. That kind of pressure blurred lines fast. Within a year, they were married on 19th September 1959, and in 1960, they had a daughter named Anna Steiger, who later became an opera singer. Bloom later admitted that Steiger's temper was visible even in the early rehearsal room, but at the time she ignored the warning signs because the success and the heat of their bond felt too strong to question. The marriage lasted 10 years and ended in 1969. The same year they still appeared together in The Illustrated Man and 3 Into Two Won't Go, a strange overlap of collapsing home life and shared film sets. Around this period, Bloom stepped deeper into Ibsen. A Doll's House became something like a mirror for her. When she played Nora in New York, critics praised her intelligence, but some said she looked too cool, almost detached from the raw emotion. That cut deeply, because she had built her early career on vulnerable heroines. She took the criticism so seriously that she entered psychoanalysis several times a week, not because she was breaking down, but because she wanted to understand herself enough to reach the roles with more truth. She later folded what she learned into her 1973 screen version of A Doll's House and other Ibsen roles. Her private life kept twisting alongside her career. She had met Steiger in early 1959, married him the same year, became a mother in 1960, and lived through a decade of emotional storms until their divorce in 1969. At the same time, she had carried on an affair with Richard Burton that had begun in 1947 or 1948, when they were in The Lady's Not for Burning. According to later biographies, the relationship started only days after his wedding in 1949 and moved on and off for about 8 years. They played Ophelia and Hamlet together, and close colleagues could see how drawn he was to her. By 1959, they worked together again in Look Back in Anger, which only stirred old feelings. She wrote openly about this long and complicated romance in her 1996 memoir. During the late 1950s, she also worked with Yul Brynner on The Brothers Karamazov, shot in 1957 and 1958, and released in 1958. She was 27, still rising, while he was already a major star. In her memoir, she confirmed a romantic relationship with him too. The imbalance was clear. He carried global fame and authority in every room, and she was the young actress navigating a giant MGM production. At the same time, she kept getting cast as elegant women trapped between powerful men, not only in The Brothers Karamazov, but in Alexander the Great in 1956 and The Buccaneer in 1958. She feared producers wanted her poise more than her emotional depth, and she returned to Shakespeare again and again to escape being shaped into a decorative figure. Coming from a Jewish family with grandparents who fled Eastern Europe, she felt like an outsider in Hollywood and did not want to be packaged as a seductress who had no inner life. Through these years, the stage became her anchor. In the early and mid-1950s, she moved through Viola, Juliet, Helena, Jessica, Miranda, Virgilia, Cordelia, and Ophelia in rapid succession with the Old Vic. She toured, she played 8 shows a week, and she balanced film work on top of that. In 1959, she added marriage and motherhood to the weight. Later, she said that the pain she carried from Burton and the early strain with Steiger helped her find the rawness she needed for roles like Blanche Dubois and Nora Helmer in the 1970s. When she made The Spy Who Came In From the Cold in 1965, she was in her mid-30s playing Nan Perry beside Richard Burton once more. Their affair had ended years earlier, and his life had become heavier with marriage, fame, and drinking. She said he felt distant during filming in West Berlin. Others on set noticed it too. Director Martin Ritt warned him about the alcohol, and novelist John le Carré was sometimes asked to sit with him and drain the whiskey so Burton could stay upright for the next scene. Bloom had to play intimate moments opposite a man she once knew closely, while everyone around tried to keep him steady. She later said the tension on screen owed something to the tension off it. The same year, she accepted The Outrage, a Western remake of Kurosawa's Rashomon. She played the wife, a woman whose rape is retold in 3 different ways. Because each version needed a different emotional truth, she had to perform versions of the assault again and again under the heat of a desert shoot. Critics later pointed to this film as an example of how actresses in that era were pushed through brutal material without much concern for their well-being. Years later, her 1996 memoir would be read in the light of the conversations that shaped the world long after, showing how early experiences with controlling co-stars and directors foreshadowed issues only fully named decades later. In January 1971, she opened on Broadway as Nora Helmer in A Doll's House and also played Hedda Gabler that season. She won the 1971 Drama Desk Award for Outstanding Performance across both plays and received recognition from the Outer Critics Circle. The timing made the role feel sharper. She had just divorced Steiger in 1969, and Nora's final walk out of the house echoed something in Bloom's own life. Reviews celebrated her, though some still used gendered words like hysterical or over-emotional. For Bloom, Nora's exit was not hysteria, but logic. She had played modern women throughout the 1960s in films like The Chapman Report and The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, and she knew that this character was not collapsing, but choosing freedom. By 1968, she had already filmed Charlie at age 37. She played Alice Kinnian, the teacher who watches Cliff Robertson's character leap from disability to genius and then slip back again. Critics like Roger Ebert said the film's emotional weight came less from the science and more from the fragile connection between Charlie and Alice. Bloom carried the tenderness and fear of someone who sees a man she cares for change faster than she can hold him. Robertson won the 1969 Academy Award, but her quiet work in those close-ups held the film together. In 1969, the same year her 10-year marriage ended, she quickly married producer Hillard Elkins and then filmed Iris Murdoch's A Severed Head, released in 1970 and 1971. She played Honor Klein in a story full of betrayal, affairs, and shifting emotional lines. It echoed her real life so closely that later writers noted how she moved from the end of one marriage to a film about marital chaos to the psychological depth of Ibsen roles within only 2 years. Those themes followed her everywhere during that time. At the beginning of the 1960s, she had also been drawn into Robert Wise's The Haunting. He hired her partly because he needed British actors to meet the UK Edie Levy rules, but he also knew she could carry the sharpness of Theodora. Her wardrobe came from Mary Quant's collections and slipped early mod fashion into the film. Theodora was one of the first openly coded lesbian characters in a major studio picture. Censors made sure she never touched Julie Harris on screen, but Wise pushed the subtext as far as he could. Exterior scenes were shot at Eddington Park, a Gothic hotel that felt haunted even without cameras. Many cast members stayed there, and despite later legends, Bloom actually spent mealtimes with Richard Johnson and Russ Tamblyn. Julie Harris often ate alone, choosing isolation to protect her character's lonely mindset. Bloom only learned this after the shoot, when Harris finally told her that staying distant was part of how she survived the role. Bloom accepted it, and they reconciled. Rod Steiger came into Claire Bloom's life with the same force he brought to his films, and for a moment, it felt exciting. They married on 19th September 1959, after working together on a London stage production of Rashomon. And within about a year, their daughter Anna arrived. Both parents were already in motion, chasing stage roles and film offers across 2 continents. So their home was never still. As Steiger's fame rose through the 1960s, especially after In the Heat of the Night in 1967, Bloom began to see the cost of living beside him. His mood could flip in an instant. Sometimes an argument exploded before a performance, sometimes right after, and the air in their home often felt tight and unpredictable. The marriage lasted close to 10 years, and on 10th of June 1969, it ended. Much later, in her 1996 memoir, Leaving a Doll's House, she wrote that walking into the role of Nora Helmer in the early 1970s felt strangely familiar, almost like she had already lived inside a dollhouse of polite smiles and heavy silence before she ever stepped on stage. But she barely had time to breathe after Steiger. Only months later, on 14th August 1969, she married Hillard Elkins, a producer who lived fast and talked faster. He moved through Broadway crowds and Hollywood circles with a kind of shiny confidence, promising big shows and bigger opportunities. At first, it swept her along. Then things began slipping. Different sources disagree on the exact legal end, placing the divorce somewhere between 1972 and 1976. But everyone agrees the marriage barely lasted 3 years. She later said she discovered how often his late nights and glamorous parties hid serial affairs, usually with younger showgirls. Some of his productions even featured her as the star, which tangled her career with his choices in ways she could not easily escape. By the mid-1970s, he had already remarried, while she stood linked to projects he controlled. That made the fallout sting even more, almost like walking back into the world of frustrated wives she had already played in The Chapman Report in 1962. Her private life was complicated enough, yet her earlier years carried their own weight. In the mid-1950s, she was in her early 20s, playing Lady Anne opposite Laurence Olivier in Richard III. He was almost 50, already married to Vivien Leigh, and already a towering name in British theatre. While Leigh struggled with mental health and deep insecurity, Olivier began an affair with Bloom. Later accounts of Richard III's production describe how the atmosphere around the seduction scene felt charged both on camera and off. In her memoir, she writes about Olivier as magnetic and selfish in equal measure, a man who could draw you in and drain you at the same time. For Leigh, it added another bruise in a marriage already breaking. Then came a strange moment in 1973. 2 English-language versions of A Doll's House appeared only months apart. One was Joseph Losey's film starring Jane Fonda. The other was Patrick Garland's film starring Claire Bloom and Anthony Hopkins. The Fonda version rewrote Ibsen boldly and leaned into 1970s feminism. The Bloom version stayed close to the play, almost like a filmed version of the stage production she had carried through New York and London. Years later, in a 2021 interview, she said she loved the play for its layers, the way it mixed love, deceit, and a woman learning to walk out on her own terms. Critics often contrasted her subtle, psychological Nora with Fonda's more fiery one, almost like 2 different worlds arguing through the same story. Her books revealed just as much. Her first memoir, Limelight and After, came out in 1982 at about 138 pages. It told the story of her early life and the intense weeks she spent rehearsing with Charlie Chaplin for Limelight back in 1952. She wrote about how he directed her gently, but with total control, sometimes down to the rhythm of a line. Reviewers said it was surprising to see Chaplin not as the soft-eyed tramp, but as a perfectionist who could make an actor feel like a puppet. Then in 1996, she published Leaving a Doll's House, which shifted the shock to her private life. She wrote about her 17-year relationship and 1990 to 1995 marriage to Philip Roth, describing long stretches of illness, depression, emotional retreat, and his open hostility toward her daughter. After they separated, He fought fiercely through lawyers and later used his 1998 novel, I Married a Communist, to slip in cruel, thin disguises of Bloom and her child. The book showed a side of Roth that many readers had never imagined. Her film roles during these decades added more layers. In 1989, at around 58, she played Miriam Rosenthal in Crimes and Misdemeanors. The character barely raises her voice, yet the entire murder plot hangs over her without her knowing. Every quiet moment with her husband feels like a test. The audience can see him failing. Because Bloom had been a leading actress since Limelight in 1952, seeing her reduced to the deceived wife added a sharper ache to the story. The film used her calm presence to show how easily fear can erase an entire shared life. More than 20 years later, in 2010, she appeared in The King's Speech at 79. Her role as Queen Mary lasted only a few scenes, yet the historical detail around her gave the film a sense of real weight. She stood beside actors playing George V and George VI with the steady stillness of someone carrying a whole dynasty behind her. Critics often pointed to how effortless she looked. 3 years later, she became a Commander of the Order of the British Empire in the 2013 birthday honors, almost like the film's royal stillness turning into a real-life recognition of nearly 60 years on screen. Not all her roles were royal. In The Mirror Cracked, broadcast on 27 December 1992, she played Marina Gregg, an aging Hollywood star whose bright smile freezes the moment she spots a familiar face at a party. Minutes later, someone is poisoned. Viewers watched Bloom carry the emotional weight of a finale in a series that had run since 1984. Some critics said she looked too controlled to play a broken movie goddess, but that coolness made the twist hit harder. The polished actress of the 1950s was now playing a murderer shaped by old scandals, miscarriages, and decades of pressure. In 1995, she appeared in Mighty Aphrodite, stepping into a mixed world of Greek chorus jokes, modern Manhattan, and a cast that moved from comic extremes to quiet, dramatic beats. Her presence helped hold the tone steady as the story jumped between porn, infidelity, and family breakdown. She played a woman from an older generation who still believed in order and proper behavior. Every calm frown hinted at years of disappointment she did not need to speak out loud. Then came Max Rose, which premiered at Cannes in 2013 and reached American cinemas in 2016. She played Eva, the wife of a retired jazz pianist whose death after 65 years of marriage leaves behind one recording that suggests she once loved someone else. Bloom was in her early 80s when the film appeared, yet the story felt close to her life in quiet ways. She had survived the 1940 to 1941 Blitz as a child and had been sent to Florida at age 10. That early loss and distance helped shape the warmth and secrecy she brought to Eva, a woman whose whole life can be rewritten by one old tape. Every now and then, gossip sites claim she had a feud with her haunting co-star, Richard Johnson. But none of the major reference works mention any tension at all. They talk about casting rules and design choices, like hiring Mary Quant to create Bloom's bohemian wardrobe, not backstage fights. Johnson's biographies stay quiet. Her own books stay quiet. It looks more like an invention of the internet age than a real story. Looking back, her influence stretches far beyond any scandal. She grew up in a Jewish family, spent part of her childhood in Florida during the war, returned to Britain, and trained in drama before taking on Shakespeare. She played Ophelia opposite Richard Burton when she was still young. She crossed from classical theater to Ibsen, Williams, and O'Neill, then moved into film and television, collecting 2 BAFTAs, a Drama Desk Award, and nominations for Emmy, Tony, and Grammy Awards. Her career became a blueprint. A young actress could start in Shakespeare, move into modern drama, then cross into film and TV without losing her stage roots. Her memoir, Limelight and After, even reads like a guide for surviving typecasting and aging in an industry that rarely shows mercy.